Hey, welcome to actual John Baker Day. Today is the July 29th in 2020. And this year for John Baker Day, what we're going to do is we're going to have a ton of conversations with very influential and knowledgeable gentlemen who know a lot about Black baseball, especially in Chicago. And our first guest who we're going to speak with today is Mr. Bob Kendrick from the Negro League Baseball Museum in Kansas City, Missouri. I've had the pleasure of meeting Bob at least one time and interviewing him on another time. And man, I'm just so excited that you're here. We're of course here with John Baker on his special day. It was 6 years ago today that he pitched and won the game, scored the winning run. And from the Son Ranto Show, infamous Cub fan, Crawly. So welcome, gentlemen. And I just want to say we have a few questions from some of the Lost Boys who were benefiting this year for John Baker Day. So I think we'll just start with one of those questions. This one's from Dylan Thompson.
Hey, Mr. Kendrick. My name is Dylan Thompson. And my question for you today is, how long have you been president for at the Negro League Museum? And also, is this something you saw yourself doing when you were younger?
Man, that's a great question, Dylan. I've been president now for 9 years, but my affiliation with this great museum is now in its 27th year. I started here as a volunteer in 1993. So no, I never saw myself in this role. I don't think you could have possibly seen moving from being a volunteer to ultimately trying to run this great institution, but it became a passion of mine. I absolutely fell in love with the story, and I fell in love with the athletes who made the story. And guys, I fashioned myself as a baseball fan, and here I was being introduced to this entire chapter of baseball and American history that I really did not know very much about. You know, like most baseball fans, I knew the names Satchel Paige and Cool Papa Bell and Josh Gibson because those names they kind of transcended and transformed and went mainstream. But I had no idea about the breadth, the depth, the scope, the magnitude that this history represented both on and off the field. And quite frankly, guys, I became almost engrossed in it. I wanted to learn as much as I could, and I didn't want to keep it to myself. I wanted everybody else to feel the same way I felt about it. And then I started to meet the players. And then particularly my dear friend, the late, great John Buck O'Neill, the founder of this museum, legendary Negro leaguer, whose roots, of course, are so deep there in Chicago. And I tell people all the time, man, once you met Buck and you were bitten by the Buck bug, it was a wrap. You just wanted to be on Buck's team. And so that's how it all began for me. But no, I never saw myself in this role. I just wanted to be a part of the organization, help the organization grow as much as I could. But I think what it also says, Dylan, and is when you find something that you love doing and you have a passion for it, you know, who knows where that may take you. You know, again, I never saw it from a standpoint that it may become a career for me, but that's exactly what happened. And every day that I walk into this museum, it is a blessed day for me. I get to do something that I absolutely love doing.
And this is also the 100th year of the Negro Leagues, and we're celebrating that. And when we had Lavonte on the other night, we did a little hats off to you, and I have the little
You talked about Bob Kendrick. The guys I've noticed on Twitter, they had something going. You know, I think it's the 100th anniversary. So nod to the Negro Leagues with the John Baker Day hat.
Right.
Yeah, there it is.
I can do that too.
No, that's awesome, man. Yeah, no, this is the 100th anniversary of the birth of the Negro Leagues.
I'll have to give it to you again.
Yeah, no, they were formed here in Kansas City in 1920 by a Chicagoan, Andrew Root Foster. And so part of the centennial celebration, which has been, you know, so many of our plans, like a lot of folks across this country, have been derailed by the coronavirus pandemic. And so as we were just trying to find ways to keep the celebration going in the midst of this public health scare that we're all engaged in right now, we came up with this notion of doing a tip your cap to the Negro Leagues. And as you all know, there's nothing more honorable in our sport than just a simple tip of the cap. It is the ultimate sign and show of respect. And now I had no idea, guys, that this thing would take off though the way that it did. And so when we created the idea, I got with my good friend, the great writer, Joe Posnanski. He's been a longtime friend. We call each other brothers, even though we're not biological brothers. We have a bond that is similar to those who are biological siblings. And I called him, and he loved the idea. He reached out to his business partner, who's a tremendous communication strategist out of the DC area, a guy named Dan McGinn. And Dan loved the idea. And then the three of us went to work on this crazy idea that became Tip Your Cap. And honestly, it went from a campaign to a movement. Because when we launched this effort on June 29th, we launched it with 4 US presidents tipping their cap. President Obama, President Clinton, President Bush, President Jimmy Carter tipping their cap, along with General Colin Powell, Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, Billie Jean King, Bob Costas, Stephen Colbert, Conan O'Brien. I mean, the list just goes on and on. Of
John
those,
Baker.
and those who didn't make their living in our game. We felt like we get some folks, you know, former baseball players, maybe some current baseball players, because they're part of this legacy. But when you start seeing these people who come outside of our sport, recognizing what the contributions of the Negro Leagues are, to me, that's what really makes this campaign so significant. And then, guys, when we went into outer space, literally went into outer space and got a tip of the cap from astronaut Chris Cassidy, who was aboard the International Space Shuttle, we knew then that we had something pretty doggone special.
Wow.
Bob, you were mentioning how you didn't, envision yourself being a part of the Negro League Baseball Museum, but that Buck O'Neil really kind of had an influence on you. And we're going to talk a little bit later about how he had an influence on a lot of important baseball players, especially in Chicago. What was it about Buck and his personality that just inspired so many people?
It was the charisma, the energy, the passion, the love that he had for human beings. And I tell people all the time, guys, had the players from the Negro Leagues been bitter about the things that transpired in their lives, every one of us would have said, well, you got every right to be bitter. But to a player I've ever met, none of them harbored any bitterness. And Buck was the ringleader of this. He just had this innate ability to love everybody universally. And it just exuded such joy that it just kind of spilled over on you. I recall days when he would bop in here to the museum, and here I am now, I'm 50 years younger than Buck, and I'm getting ready to get on the elevator to come up one floor. And here comes Buck running up the stairs in his 90s, and all of a sudden you're like, well, man, I can't get on the elevator, I got to go with Buck. And so that's the way that he was. And he was a tremendous leader of men, and which is why he was such a successful manager with the Monarchs, a great coach there with the Cubs when he got that opportunity. And George Altman, who played there in Chicago with the Cubs for many years, Buck brought him over to the Cubs. And George Altman spent time in the major leagues, played in the Negro Leagues, but also spent time in the major leagues, then would go on to play in Latin America, and then had a great career in Japan. And he still says today that Buck O'Neil was the best manager he ever played for. So he understood men. He knew, John, when he needed to put his arm around you, and he knew when he needed to kick you in your rump. And that's a special gift. But people ask me all the time, what do you remember most about Buck? What struck you most about Buck? And all the great stories that he shared with me that I get to share today. But the thing that I think I embrace the most is this very simple notion. You always felt better leaving Buck than you did when you came to see him. And there's just not a lot of people that strike you in that manner. But man, that was Buck O'Neil. And when I met him, the infectious personality, the charisma, it grabbed hold of me. And for me, I was so blessed to travel all over the country as Buck was literally gallivanting, preaching the gospel of the Negro Leagues and the virtues of his museum to any and everybody who would listen. And guess who was right there riding on his coattail? Old Bob. I'm there every step of the way. And I guess I was one of his disciples. and now I get an opportunity to try and carry on. You can't fill his enormous shoes. You would be silly to even think that you can. But for me to walk in Buck O'Neill's shadow is an honor. Yeah, and you know what? I feel like that shadow is protecting me. It is helping guide my footsteps every step along this journey.
I'd like to bring on Lavonte Stewart from the Lost Boyz has entered the green room, so I'm gonna bring Lavonte on to join us. Hi, Lavonte. Welcome
Good morning,
to
Danny.
John Baker Day special. Lavonte, meet Bob, and and this is Crawly right up on top. I don't think you met him yet either. John, I wanted to ask you about, there's obviously such an amazing history for the Chicago Cubs, the great coaches that have come through Chicago. Do you feel that history when you're in the dugout, when you're kind of backstage at Wrigley Field? Do you feel those guys like Buck O'Neill, kind of their spirits in the same way that Bob is explaining the infectious personality?
Yeah. I don't think that there's a lot of stadiums. Wrigley is alive. It has living plants on the wall, and you notice it. I think it's tough when you're a baseball player. You're so focused on the things that you need to do. You're very internally focused. Well, what are all these things I need to do? But playing at Wrigley, and it was cheating for me because anytime I got internally focused and would go down to the dugout before batting practice or something when I was a player there, Ernie Banks was always in the dugout. So you'd go down there and you'd be having a tough day. And as Bob is speaking about Buck, I had the same experience with my experience with Ernie Banks, where I'm 0 for my last 12, and I would go sit down. I'd look over. I'm like, man, Mr. Banks, why are you smiling so much again? And he's just looking out at the field, smiling, thinking about how happy he was. And like, you really felt it, you really feel those presents. I can remember the first time I ever played at Wrigley Field as a visitor in 2008. I had to step out of the batter's box because I thought in my head when I was getting in, I was trying to get ready to bat against Carlos Zambrano or something. And I had to step out because I thought this is where Babe Ruth called a shot from this spot where I'm standing on the field. That's crazy. It's crazy. You experience a little bit of it when you go to Boston and you see the seat in right field and they claim that Ted Williams hit a ball out there. I still don't believe that. But, I go on the mound and I think that like 6 years ago today, that night I'm on the mound, but like Ferguson Jenkins was pitching on that mound. Like you're sharing that space with those people. They're still alive when they're there. And Danny, as you and I know, you can walk down the street from Wrigley and go into Graceland Cemetery, and you can walk right over by the lake, and sitting right next to Ruth Page is Ernie Banks. And so we take the family a couple times a week and go visit because that's the history of where I work and the people I work for. So yeah, you absolutely feel it. And to speak a little bit to Bob's point on Buck O'Neill, in 2004, Buck came and spoke to the Texas League All-Star teams, and I was part of those teams, and I got to meet him. And the same thing that I had, it's like I know that it's really hard to confront these things. And I think this is why we're having these conversations, Bob, is that there's a lot of people out there that don't understand what people went through. They don't understand. It's been the pain has been washed away, and I think when in our eyes, when you grow up in the suburbs, you don't have the perspective to understand other people's experiences. And thinking about my time with Buck O'Neill, it's like there's some cognitive dissonance in my mind when I think about how joyful and positive he was and what the energy was like coming off of him, in contrast to what his life experience might have been. And I still don't even know personally how to even make sense of that. I can't empathize. You can't sympathize because as someone like me, you're just never put in that place. I had smooth sailing and pats on the back all the way to the big leagues. Like the biggest things I faced were hitting 230 1 year in AAA and having to come back from that. And I think about the things that, Billy Williams went through going back to Alabama. And my first year as a coach here in this organization, I get to the field and Billy comes in to do a couple weeks in Chicago. And he was we shared a locker together. So when you share a locker with Billy Williams, let me tell you what you do. You get out of that locker as fast as possible with a sign of respect. I was changing in 10 seconds, but I felt so honored to be like, I got to serve as like his caddy, like I'd be like, sweet swinging Billy, what do you need? What do you need from me? You need me to go get you a hat? You need to get me a shirt? Like, what do you need? And let's talk a little baseball. And you hear those stories. Yeah. So Danny, back to your original question. Those people are so alive on that field. And as long as we play baseball there, they're never going to be forgotten.
You know, Bob, as a Cubs fan, one of the things that I don't want to say frustrates me, but bothers me a little bit is that there isn't a lot of attention paid to Buck as far as, you know, a lot of Cub fans don't know the history of Buck O'Neil and the importance to the Cubs organization. John was just bringing up Billy Williams, and we were talking earlier, you know, people don't realize that Billy left the Cubs, and can you tell us a little bit more about how Buck O'Neil was able to keep Billy Williams in Chicago?
Yeah, no, it's a great story, and you're right. Billy had actually left the team and gone back home to Whistler, Alabama. You know, I think he had gotten a little homesick, and I'm sure was dealing with some of the racism that was so prevalent at that point in time. And he just said, okay, I'm done with this. Went back home to Whistler, Alabama. And who did the Cubs send to go get him? Buck O'Neil. And Buck goes there, and for several days, he would just pick Billy up and drive him around to local ballparks. And of course, all the other kids were so proud that they had one of their native sons who was a major league ball player. Oh, Billy, we're so proud of you, man. You're in the major leagues. And after 3 or 4 days of this, Billy finally looks at Buck. He says, okay, Buck, I'm ready to go back. And the Cubs wanted Buck to put Billy on the bus and send him back. And Buck said no. Old Buck had an old Plymouth Fury. He said, I'm going to put him in my car and I'm going to drive him. And he did. He drove him from Whistler, Alabama to, I believe, San Antonio, Texas is where the Cubs were spring training at that time. Billy Williams, of course, becomes sweet swinging Billy Williams, Hall of Famer. And again, I'm sure Mr. Williams would tell you he owes his career to Buck O'Neil. But Ernie Banks would have said the exact same thing. And John, that infectious personality that you're talking about with Ernie, that's Buck O'Neil. Yeah, Ernie was like a surrogate son to Buck. And Buck embraced him and Lou Brock when Lou was there with the Cubs. And of course, Buck brought both of those Hall of Famers to the organization. And so, but Buck had signed Ernie to play here for the Kansas City Monarchs, got him out of Dallas, Texas. And Ernie would tell you that Buck not only taught him baseball, but he taught him how to be a man. He taught him social graces. You know, he everything, taught him how to dress. And believe it or not, John, Ernie was a bit of an introvert when he came. And I know that's hard for any of us to imagine who got to know the gregarious Ernie Banks. But that personality that came out of Ernie, that was Buck O'Neil. Yeah, and then Buck would bring you Lou Brock. He would bring you Lee Arthur Smith. So Buck had 3 Hall of Famers. Hopefully a 4th Cub Hall of Famer in Joe Carter at some point in time. But then he also brought you George Altman and Sweet Lou Johnson. You know, all of these guys, Gene Baker. And Ernie and Gene Baker were both Kansas City Monarchs. They formed the Major's first black double play combination there with the Chicago Cubs. So Buck's roots there in Chicago are deep and meaningful. And so, yeah, we do wish that the Cubs organization would do more to recognize Buck. They would make Buck the first African-American coach in 1962, breaking barriers. Now, mind you, this is 15 years later after Jackie Robinson breaks the color barrier. It took that long before Major League Baseball got their first African-American coach. And as Buck would say, I was so proud of being the first. But he says, I couldn't stick out my chest because I knew all of these other great minds who had been part of the Negro Leagues who were more than capable of waving a guy home. And so, but he was this barrier breaker as well. And so, yeah, no, we hope that the organization at some point in time will look at a more deeper, meaningful tribute to Buck O'Neil because he brought a lot to the organization and to the city of Chicago.
Yeah, and it is kind of unlauded. Lavonte, I was wondering if I know that we have some questions from some of the kids that play on your baseball team on the Lost Boyz. How aware are they of the history of the famous well, the famous Buck O'Neil and also Ernie Banks and how Buck scouted all these players. How aware are they of even the concept of the Negro Leagues and what that means to, I guess, their place in the world now in 2020?
Good question, Danny, and good morning, gentlemen. I know I was kind of late getting in here. I just love listening to Bob. But yeah, they're very aware. So one of the intentional things that we did at Lost Boyz a few years ago is in terms of our curriculum during the winter time, we call it winter clinic, but it's not what we usually consider a baseball clinic. It's just a name. But during the months of January to March, where Chicago, you're snowed in, we're indoors practicing, playing, learning, working on schoolwork, civic engagement projects. But particularly, we have an area where we focus on the history of baseball. And for the girls, they focus on the history of women's fast pitch. And so when we started examining that history, we began to narrow it down in such a specific way that we want to examine the contributions of various races and cultures to the game and how that melds together. So yeah, we're not just concentrated on black ball players and their contributions. We want to talk about Latin American players. We want to talk about, for lack of better terms, white ball players. We want to talk about everybody who's played in this game and has contributed to the social fabric through this game. But specifically, of course, we take pride in teaching our children about the Negro League. So it is ingrained and they learn it every year. And some of them get frustrated because they say, Coach, I've been learning this for the same stuff 3 years in a row. I said, good. That means you'll be able to go out and spit it off the top of your head without looking at your notes. You should be able to engage people in a meaningful way, and you should be accurate in the information that you're able to discuss with people. You should be able to expound on some of these things. So a lot of the kids that are with us, they got an opportunity to learn about Mr. Cub, before he left us. And so, they've been learning, right? And learn about Minnie Minoso over here on our South Side. And so just learning the history. We definitely wanted to talk about Buck O'Neil and Fergie Jenkins. I got a friend, George Castle, who's a sports author here in Chicago, and he's written several books on the Cubs. And George is my really, really good friend. So you got this younger black guy, older Jewish guy, and we're like peanut butter and jelly. And I can sit and listen to George all day, and George will be on the phone or visiting with Fergie Jenkins, or he'll call me and he's, down in Florida sitting out on the patio with Andre Dawson. And so, the Cubs are, Negro League baseball and how it connects to Chicago, the rich history, Rube Foster. We have to talk about that. Buck O'Neil. It is just so much in terms of black contributions to baseball, and the kids learning it and them learning how significant that their city is in that history of black excellence in baseball. Just the fact that these kids have to learn that the largest crowd ever to enter Comiskey Park was for the East-West All-Star game. It drew more fans than any normal game in Chicago. And so that is significant for them to understand. And then we talk about how people would come out in their Sunday best for those games. They didn't come out in, sackcloth pants, and they used their little resources they had to get the best dress they had, the best suit they had. And, you would have thought Jesus was coming that day when folks come out to that game, ready to meet the Lord. But, there's so much pride in that, Danny.
Well, can I play a couple of questions from some kids that maybe turn back the clock to somebody like Rube Foster? Because this is from Eli, which is one of our podcast partners.
Who is the founder or group of people who founded the Negro Leagues?
So I don't know if you could hear that, but who are the founder and who are the people that founded the Negro Leagues? And this is the follow-up question from Caleb Morris.
All right. My name is Caleb Morris. Good morning. It's 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, eating my Italian beef with some fries. So my question for the National Negro League is, how many teams were there in the National Negro League when it was formed? All right, that's my question.
Now, is that a Chicago kid or what? 1 a.m. with his 1 a.m. He's like me last weekend.
I'm
You know,
jealous that he could eat that Italian beef sandwich at 1 in the morning.
Good morning.
And he
said.
was the valedictorian of his 8th grade class. That's Caleb just graduated. He's headed to Kenwood Academy.
Oh man, he was upset.
So yeah, if we could get back to turn back the clock to Rube Foster, because I know that there was baseball before Rube Foster formed the Negro Leagues, but could you talk a little bit about Rube Foster, who also comes from Texas, like Ernie Banks, and kind of coming up from there, coming to Chicago, building a baseball empire? If you could expound on that a little bit about his contributions.
Yeah, well, to answer the kids' questions, it was Rube Foster who led a contingent of 8 independent black baseball team owners into Kansas City in 1920. They met at the Paseo YMCA. The building is just right around the corner from where the museum currently operates. And so for a lot of folks who sometimes wonder why a Negro Leagues museum is in Kansas City, it's because Kansas City is the birthplace of the Negro Leagues. That's it. And that's going to be the future Buck O'Neill Education and Research Center, that beautiful 4-story mural of Buck, as you can see there, is just absolutely breathtaking as you come in from going north on the Paseo on the south side of that building. But that is where they met to form the Negro Leagues. And so Rube Foster is affectionately known as the father of the Negro Leagues. But Danny, you're right. There have been black baseball well before the actual Negro National League was formed in 1920 with those 8 teams that started those leagues. 2 of them were Chicago teams, the Chicago Giants and Rube Foster's Chicago American Giants. And then the Chicago Giants didn't last very long, but Rube Foster's Chicago American Giants they were a juggernaut. They were one of the dominant teams, along with the Monarchs and later Pittsburgh Crawfords and Homestead Grays, as some of the great baseball franchises of the Negro Leagues. Rube Foster, though, guys, a lot of people don't talk about it. Rube Foster had been a great pitcher in the pre-era of the Negro Leagues, the early era of black baseball. As a matter of fact, Rube Foster, John, is credited with having invented what we now know to be the screwball. Back then, it was called a fadeaway. And Rube perfected this pitch, man, so much so that the great Major League manager, John McGraw, would sneak Rube Foster into his camp so that Rube Foster could teach Christy Mathewson how to throw the screwball. Guys, Christy Mathewson threw the pitch all the way into the National Baseball Hall of Fame that he learned from Rube Foster. But Foster was best known as this visionary, this tremendous leader. He would organize the Negro Leagues. He would become president of the Negro Leagues. He owned the Chicago American Giants, and he managed the Chicago American Giants. And as a manager, Rube Foster was known to fine his ball players in the early 1900s as much as $5 if you were tagged out standing up. You were supposed to smile. Now, Rube Lavonte would draw a circle down the first base line and a circle down the third base line. And if every one of his players couldn't drop a bunt inside that circle, he would fine them. Yeah, see, he was adamant about the style of play that became signature in Negro Leagues baseball. Fast, aggressive, daring. They bunt their way on. They steal second, they steal third, and man, if you weren't too smart, they were stealing home. And guys, what makes it so special is this was the style of play that drew both black and white fans who sat side by side during an era when doing something socially together was virtually unheard of. Negro Leagues baseball brought the 2 races together. And that's the irony of this great story. Here's a league born out of segregation that becomes the driving force for social change in this country.
Yeah, that's. I think that's something that people don't realize. They, that the major leagues were segregated, and I know that we do have another question about that from one of the kids about whether the from Jihan Rockman has a question about
Jihan Rockman, Lost Boyz Inc. My question is, in the Negro League times, were African American baseball players allowed to play in the MLB league?
He wants to know if during the Negro Leagues time, if they were black players in the major leagues. And I think that not a lot of people know that there were black players in the major leagues before the Negro Leagues, and also while the Negro Leagues were ending.
Yeah.
That there was an overlap.
Yeah.
So I was
there was an absolute overlap, because Jackie braced Culberry in 1947, and as Danny alludes, there were other black players who had been part of major league teams briefly. You know, there was a couple guys who didn't even know that they were black. People didn't know they were black that were on teams, and then guys like Moses Fleetwood Walker, who was of darker skin, who played on what we would consider to be a major league team going back to the late 1800s. And Moses Fleetwood Walker, guys, was a barehanded catcher. Yeah, ouch. And it didn't last long before, believe it or not, a Chicagoan. Yeah, a Chicagoan who was he was such a great ball player that basically created a gentleman's agreement that banned blacks from playing on white professional teams.
And there he is.
Yeah, Adrian Cap Anson. Cap Anson was an outstanding baseball player. He is in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. And so it was easy for him to build a coalition of followers who shared that same sentiment, and that would ultimately ban black players until Jackie braced the color barrier in 1947. But you also have to remember that it took Major League Baseball 12 years before every major league team had at least one black baseball player. The Boston Red Sox would be the last team to integrate in 1959, when they signed the late Elijah Pumpsie Green to break the integration cycle. Well, the Negro Leagues would cease operations in 1960, a year later, because by then the best young black stars had moved into the major league or into their minor league system. So the major leagues no longer needed the Negro Leagues. Yeah, because if you were an aspiring young black ball player, you could bypass the Negro Leagues now, because you could go straight into the major leagues minor league system and work your way to the major leagues. And so ultimately it put the Negro Leagues out of business. But this was a very slow, meticulous process that played out over a time span of 12 years. So essentially a major league team would bring a black player up and then eventually bring another black player up so that that player wouldn't be so tremendously isolated. Now, the lone exception there would be the Dodgers. The Dodgers were very aggressive signing black players, and all these players came out of the Negro Leagues. So as you can imagine, you can't siphon all that talent out of the Negro Leagues and then expect the Negro Leagues to be what they were. And then the fan base left the Negro Leagues because there was a natural curiosity to see how these great black stars were going to fare now that they had the opportunity to play in the major leagues. Because guys, despite what they had done in building the Negro League and the exceptional talent that was there in the Negro League, the world still said the highest level in which you could play this game was the major leagues. And so they all aspired to prove to the world that they were as good as anybody who played this game. Man, Satchel Paige takes a pay cut to go to the major leagues. Yeah, he takes a pay cut because along the barnstorming circuit, Satchel was perhaps the highest paid player in all of baseball because the entire town, John, was shut down. When the old man was coming into town, the entire town was shut down to watch him do his thing. And he was savvy enough to negotiate a percentage of the game. And so, yeah, he takes a pay cut to go to Cleveland in 1948, and he and the great Larry Doby helped Cleveland win its last World Series. Now, my Indian fans get tired of hearing me say that. Yeah, they won the World Series in 48. They haven't won a World Series since then.
Wow. Bob, I think they got to a World Series in 2016. I'm just trying to remember what happened in that one.
Yeah. Something about some rain delay or something.
Yeah, something happened.
Well, something beautiful happened. But hey, Bob, I want to, if I can add to that, I'm really glad you brought up the fact about that, because I think it has a bigger significance, even outside of baseball. It leads still to a current modern day problem, which, you know, John and Danny, thank you so much, and Crawly, for speaking up on this, for standing with us in America to finally say enough is enough. And so when you think about it, that same story is juxtaposed across Black culture. We build all of these institutions for ourselves and for our families and our children and our communities because we're isolated and we're segregated from other institutions and from, you know, the economy and being a part of this. And so, for example, you know, Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, we know about that massacre. But when you examine what happened there, you look in Chicago and Bronzeville after the Great Migration, some of the greatest minds and legends in Chicago have lived in Bronzeville, came here, right? Musicians, artists, intellectuals, ball players. Bronzeville, from all accounts, was the place to be if you were Black. Now it's 2020. Bronzeville is trying to make a comeback, but it's so bad here, Bob, that point. We used to call it the low end, and you Chicago guys know what I'm talking about. Nobody wanted to go down on 35th and State Street if you weren't going to a White Sox game, because you had Stateway Garden projects there. You had other projects, and you know, and it was just kind of a dismal place. And you would not have known this significant and great history about, you know, all of this success in the Black community if people didn't preserve those oral histories and stories and try to pass them along. So you really do see a pattern, an egregious pattern, that has, you know, really happened to Black people as a result of segregation and us building our institutions. And then when integration occurs, it flattened a lot of things for us. And so, you know, I just want to mention it because that is still it is really a big factor and a contributing factor to the socioeconomic conditions of Black Americans, not just in Chicago, but all around this country. If you start looking in Black communities and cities, you should see that something is going on and say, wait a minute, something just ain't right.
Well, and to your point, Lavonte, you can go back, and I tell people all the time, you can trace the rise and fall of the Negro Leagues with the rise and fall of Black economy in this country. And to a great extent, Black economy never recovered from losing the Negro Leagues. So again, what was good morally, what was good socially, was devastating economically. And you see, wherever you had successful Black baseball, you had thriving Black economies. And to hear Buck O'Neil and Ernie and my dear friend, late great Ted Double Duty Ratcliffe, who lived and died in Chicago at 103. Yeah, he died in 2005. He was a fixture over at White Sox ballpark. And to hear those guys talk about what the South Side of Chicago was like, man, you know, you just wish you could go back in time and be there. And Lavonte mentioned the great East-West All-Star Classic, debuted in 1933, the same year that Major League Baseball's All-Star Game debuted. And yes, it did outdraw Major League Baseball's All-Star Game, because he's right. They would put over 50,000 fans in Chicago's Comiskey Park for that showcase event, one of the greatest sporting events in American sports history that nobody knows anything about. And Buck O'Neil says that Black folks would come from as far west as Los Angeles by train, as far south as New Orleans, as far east as New York, converging on Chicago for this showcase event. They stand on the south side. Yeah, they all stand on the south side. And so you can kind of get an understanding of how special the South Side was. Or here in Kansas City, where the museum is located, historic 18th and Vine, same thing. I think 18th and Vine is one of the most recognized street cross sections anywhere in the world, because that intrinsic mixture of jazz and baseball that radiated from this street corner. And anybody who was anybody, particularly in the world of jazz, you know, they could get a gig in Kansas City when they couldn't get a gig anywhere else, because all the restaurants had live music, all the hotels had live music, and you had nightclubs galore right here in this area that my office is right now. And when we built this museum, it was part of an effort to try and revitalize historic 18th and Vine, who, like a lot of urban areas, Lavonte, had died and been left abandoned until we built this museum here 30 years ago as an effort to resurrect this once very proud, prominent African-American community.
But my granddaddy would tell me stories about that, man. And he would say, you thought the game was something. You should have seen the nightlife down in Bronzeville, because you could just be walking around and bump into all of these stars. You know, you'd be at a jazz club and Louis Armstrong is playing that night. And, you know, you got names are escaping me right now, but, you know, you see some of the famous actors and actresses for that time, and they'd be in Chicago. So you're right, Bob. Everybody descended on Chicago for that game, and it was just, you know, according to my elders, it was just a blast for a couple of days, you know, here on the South Side, specifically down in Bronzeville. You know, it's a big family coming together around baseball.
And you have to understand, segregation is one of the most shameful things to ever happen in this country's history. But what segregation did was it forced ownership. So the degree of ownership that was so prevalent in those African-American communities, I'm not sure we will ever see that again. Here in Kansas City, Black folks could only move within a 13-block radius. 13 blocks, couldn't go outside those 13 blocks. But man, within those 13 blocks, you had everything you need. Yeah, and more. And I think what we saw was, you saw other folks coming in to this area to enjoy that nightlife and these great musicians. I'll never forget, Buck tells a wonderful story. He says the Monarchs had played here in Kansas City on a Saturday, and they were all going to go home, John. They were going to get cleaned up, get dressed, and they're going to come back to a nightclub here at 18th and Vine called the Subway. Well, it was called the Subway because the club was actually below street level. And so as Buck is telling the story, he said they all sitting around in the nightclub, sipping on a little tea. When a kid walks in, he's got a horn over his shoulder, he wants to blow. Everybody say, let him blow. Well, Buck said his kid gets up on the stage, he starts making some noises out of this horn they never heard before, but you had to pay attention. That kid was a young Charlie Yardbird Parker. You know, so that's the kind of star power that we're talking about. Louis Armstrong had his own semi-pro Black baseball team. Cab Calloway had his own semi-pro Black baseball team. And so I tell people all the time, all the jazz musicians wanted to be baseball players. All the baseball players wanted to be jazz musicians. So fitting that they came together here at historic 18th and Vine.
Man,
and all the backup catchers wanted to be pitchers, right, John?
Well, this is blowing my mind. You know, as Danny knows, my brother's a musician, and when he was in Chicago, he went and studied at Northwestern music performance, plays the trombone, and when he was in Chicago, he played in the Clarence Cockrell band, and got to play with Clarence. And I think about just like these parallels of the relationship between performance, right, which is my job now, which is focusing on helping people perform better, and how these things go from how the athlete can identify with the musician and vice versa. And then again, thinking about ownership, like we're talking about. I remember, I think it was last year, the year before, Killer Mike, the musician, came out with a TV show, and he did a whole episode on the dollar and where the dollar goes in and out of the community. And it was things like that where I you know, at almost 40 years old, when I watch something like that, and I go, how the hell did I not know about this? Like, I consider myself somebody that tries to stay abreast to like the current things that go on, but it's just so hard to like, absent of having conversations like this and having access to Bob, Kendrick, and to Lavonte, who's, you know, people who are, but you guys are leading change in the community, but doing it by, like, in one case, exposing the actual history to everybody, but then also, Lavonte, in your case, like, devoting your life to making things change. I hope that what we're talking about here gets to a lot of people, and I'm going to hope that the Cubs do that, and further, I'm gonna cause some problems now and make some stinks about this is how I do my job. I spot things that I don't like, and then I just tell as many people as possible until something changes. And it's actually worked over my last 5 years of my career here with the Cubs. But the fact that we don't do anything like specifically to honor Buck O'Neil, especially in this time, like. That's the first word that comes to my mind, or the first feeling that I notice as I kind of mindfully think about what's going through my body right now is embarrassment. Mm-hmm. It's embarrassing. Our treatment of this in our country. I mean, the fact that it takes what it took for me to watch on TV a while ago when that video came out from Minnesota. The fact that it took me seeing that, having to see that, to finally go like, that's it. You know, like we have this day where, you know, Danny and the bleacher fans have put together this thing, and we've always tried to raise money for the community. But the fact that it took that, like, again, it's still what I feel most is embarrassed, and kind of simultaneously hearing this information, I also feel hopeful.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to say, because I've talked to both Bob and John about this, is the contributions that are deep seated within even the style of play that baseball, in the way that it's played now. Like if you take the Negro League style of play, you know, like you were saying, stealing first, you steal first base, second base, third base, and home, you know, and, you know, you have your first female player, you know, or probably a few, Tony Stone. And I know that, you know, there was a lot of like the kind of the Harlem Globetrotter kind of style of baseball that was played. You know, they call it what? Flashy, I guess, a flashier style of play, or I'd call it fun. But John,
Danny would call it showboating.
Showboating. That's the word I was looking for.
Accuse the Negro Leaguers of showboating. You know, a guy would dive in the hole, flip it behind his back, and start the double play. and Buck O'Neil would oftentimes say, so number one, if you got something to show it. Yeah, no, but the other reason he says only showboating when you can't do it. Yeah.
Bob, speaking on that, I got a question for you. I can't think of the name of the movie right now. It's like For the Love of the Game or something like that. And it was, you know, a movie in the 90s, and it just kind of captured all of this.
Soul of the Game.
Soul of the Game. Let me ask you about a scene. It wasn't realistic. I think it was a scene they were in Kansas City. Satchmo was on the bump, and I think it was young Jackie coming up to the plate. It was Josh Gibson, I think, one of the players, and he cleared the infield. He told Jackie to get off. Jackie wanted to stay back on the infield, and he's like, "What are you doing?" Like, boy, get off the field, boy. He had control of the whole show, and everybody in the stadium was going crazy. You know, the fans knew what it was. This is Satchmo time. Was that a real story?
That now they fictionalized that particular storyline, but yes, that was real. And so there were times where Satchel, it never really happened in league games, but in the barnstorming world, where he would call the outfield in and sit the infield down as he would proceed to strike out in the matter of a game. Now, I can tell you this, guy, no one believes in Satchel Paige's ability more than Satchel Paige. And he wasn't bashful about telling you about it. And so they were playing in the Denver Post tournament. And so Satchel has his Satchel Paige All-Stars. They're playing an all-white semi-pro team from the Coors Brewing Company. And so Buck is playing first base for Satchel and his All-Stars. And Buck says the first kid from the Coors team gets into the batter's box. He digs in, says Satchel throws him a fastball. John, the kid swung as hard as he could, topped it, dribbled it down the third base line. It stays fair. He beats it out. He gets an infield hit. Well, Buck says about that time, one of the kids from the Coors dugout steps out on top of the dugout steps, and he yells out, "Let's beat him. He ain't nothing but an overrated darky." Well, Satchel's nickname famously for Buck was Nancy. That's a whole nother story. We ain't got time to tell you that story. That story actually happened in Chicago at the Evans Hotel on the south side of Chicago. Anyway, Buck says Satchel looks over at first base. He says, Nancy, did you hear that? Buck said, yes, Satchel, I heard him. He said, Nancy, bring him in. And so Buck says he's at first base, John. He turns, he motions for the outfield to take a couple steps in. Satchel looks over at first base. He says, Nancy, bring them all the way in. There were 7 guys kneeling around the mound. Satchel, Page, and the catcher. And Satchel strikes out the side on 9 straight pitches. He looks into the Coors dugout and says, overrated darky, hey. And of course, the kid that said this was embarrassed. They all came out to apologize to Satchel and his teammates. But Buck O'Neil swore to the day he died that if he had one game to win and any choice of any pitcher from any era, it'd be the legendary Leroy Satchel Page. He said you might beat him when he was out there messing around. But man, when he was locked and loaded, forget about it.
Well, that concept of showboating is still somewhat controversial in today's game. And I know, John, you wrote an article a few years back about your time with the Toros del Este down in the Dominican Republic. And I've talked to Bob, too, about the just amazing contributions that the Negro League ball players gave to those, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, when those guys weren't allowed to play in the major leagues, a different form of baseball came to be. Your Sammy Sosa, kissing blowing the kiss to the crowd, all that stuff.
Right
and
here.
John, and you talked about it, in your article.
I'm happy to speak on it. So when I was 30 years old and tried to prove to Major League Baseball after a catastrophic arm injury that I could still play. So I took a job to play down in the Dominican Republic. And I'll tell the first story, which is hilarious because it talks about one of our players right now, but then I'll get to the one that's actually meaningful in this situation. So I get down there and we have this big overgrown first baseman in the Padres organization, American player, who's just kind of oafish and ridiculous. And he's talking to me about how fantastic it is to play in the Dominican. I'm like, what's so exciting? He's like, man, you get someone strikes you out, like they're fist pumping, like everybody's having fun. There's a band playing in the out, or there's a band playing behind the dugout. You go and play in the Capitol and they got dancers on the top of either dugout. The music never stops. Like, it's just, the energy is so high. You could do whatever you want here. You can do whatever you want. You get a hit, you can throw your bat. And so he's like, so we're driving to San Francisco, which is like a 3-hour drive from where we are on the bus. And so we stop at in the kind of the middle of the country there at a gas station. And he goes and buys a huge, like, multicolored rosary that hangs down to about his belly button. And he's like, I'm gonna hit a home run in this game today. I'm gonna hit it about 450 feet. I'm gonna pop that rosary out and I'm gonna swing it around my neck on the way to first base. And sure enough, in his first at bat of that game, Anthony Rizzo comes up and hits a home run to right field and fires the rosary all the way around his neck. And coming from the United States, were something like that to happen in a professional game here, people would have, lots of feelings would have been hurt by that, right? They would have been so sad that you showed me up, not so much concerned about the fact that they threw a meatball that got hit 450 feet, but more about what the guy did after he did something amazing. Well, when I looked into the other team's dugout, what I saw was they're all laughing and pointing at him. Like, all of them, they're laughing and pointing at him. Then they're laughing and pointing at the pitcher. The pitcher's got a smile on his face. Like, he's just shaking his head. And I thought, man, this is really different, right? So I asked one of the players from in La Romana, when they announced the guys that come up to hit, if they're from the backyard, as they call it, they say del patio, del patio, del patio as the guy's coming up to bat, because that means he's from La Romana. La Romana, the area is, you have Casa de Campo, which is this like huge resort, really nice resort in the Dominican, but then the surrounding area is made up by people that have generally come up cutting sugarcane. That's what they do down there. You cut sugarcane, or you get a job at the hotel, or you work at the Jumbo. Education usually stops around 3rd grade. And so I asked one of the players, one of the Del Patio players, I'm like, man, Victor Mercedes was his name. I'm like, tell me, like, Dime, tell me about what's going on with all of this. The stuff gets thrown. Like, what does that mean to you? What does it mean to you? And he goes, Americans think that we do that to show other people up. He goes, but I do that because I'm celebrating my opportunity to play baseball. Every time I get on this field, I'm not cutting sugar cane. I'm not folding towels at a hotel. This is my opportunity to do something better. And having that personal experience and actually being willing to ask the question, that took what I had learned, what I had been kind of socialized to learn as a kid growing up playing baseball in the U.S., which was my way of baseball. They say play baseball the right way, right? They say that all the time. What that generally means is play baseball my way, the way that I learned it, not the way that you learned it, the way that I learned it. And so it just gave me a new perspective, and I realized that those things were not my way that I was taught, and I still played the same way. You know, if I ever hit a home run, I put my head down, I ran around the bases, and if I got a base hit, or if I hit a ground ball, I ran hard every single time. I just wasn't taught to be flashy. So if I were to try to do it, it would look ridiculous. You know, like you just said, Bob. Like I didn't showboat because I couldn't. You know, and now I watch these guys play. I watch these guys play today, and like the most exciting players in the game are guys like Javi Baez, and if we're going to just stick within Chicago, Javi Baez and Tim Anderson, the shortstops that we have in Chicago, like they play with this like passion, they play with this love, and they play with this flair that, man, they tried to run that out there. If you tried to run that out there even 15, 20 years ago, man, these stupid BS unwritten rules that exist. Yeah. My kids call those rules, my daughters call those rules brules with a B, because the B at the front of brule stands for BS.
And I can tell you now, there were no unwritten rules in the Negro Leagues. If you don't want me to throw my bat, you better get me out.
Yeah.
And you know what? Oh, sorry, Danny. I was just going to add to that. I struggle with that. 12 years in with Lost Boyz, I've been coaching. I think about 14, 15 years of my life. And I've been playing, baseball, football my entire life. I struggle with it as a coach for a while, right? Because the way I was raised, I think I mentioned it last time. My mom was liberal, my dad's conservative. So I had this confluence of the way I grew up, right? But I had this great respect for the game, and I understood the class in the game. But as I began to get older, I did realize and start examining that and thinking about those unspoken rules, those unwritten rules. And I'm like, I started really getting uncomfortable with them. And in some ways, I'm like, it doesn't fit with who we are as people. Speaking of Black Americans, that's who we are, a lot of us, externally, we these happy people, and this is how we express ourselves, and like what John was describing in the DR. And so, I got to a place with the kids, especially a couple of years ago when Tim Anderson took a little flack for his bat flips, and then I loved his response, and that's when I really fell in love with Twitter, because he came with the Migos song Clout, and he put that as the background to him hitting and doing some bat flips. And then I'm just listening. These are explicit lyrics. And I'm like, you know what? You're right. Yeah, let's roll with it. Because we got to teach these kids, man. Listen, the kids in my community go through so much. I got a little girl who's out there on that softball field. We got to be careful with her, because this little girl still got a bullet in her body at 11 years old. And so the doctor says she has to be careful of her movement on the field. So I got kids worried about things like that. Babies now getting shot in Chicago on the South Side. So what the heck, man? You hit that ball, you crank one, you're proud of yourself. Flip that bat, do a cartwheel down the first, whatever it is that builds pride in yourself, your confidence. Enjoy the game. Like I tell them, this is our holy place. When we get to this field, we're celebrating God, we're celebrating life, family, our country. We're celebrating all of these things. So have fun, be a kid. I'm 44 years old, and every time I step on that field for practice or whatever, I become 12 years old all over again every day that I do it. And I'm going to do it, Danny, until they bury me. Matter of fact, bury me with some cleats, I tell my kids.
And it's really interesting, John and Lavonte, the players from Latin America, they still play the game the way the Negro Leaguers taught their ancestors. You see, you have to understand that the Negro Leaguers were oftentimes the first Americans to play in those countries. And when they went to those countries, man, they were welcomed with open arms. They stayed in the finest hotels. They ate in the finest restaurants that those countries had to offer, and then would come back home and be treated like second-class citizens. So as a result, a lot of Negro League players would call those Spanish-speaking countries home for one simple reason. Because in those countries, they weren't black baseball players. They were just baseball players. But sometimes people kind of get it twisted. You know, to play the game is still entertainment. And in the Negro Leagues, it was entertainment at its highest form. It doesn't mean that you weren't going to see great, fundamentally sound baseball. But they were going to bring it, man. They were going to bring it. They were going to put on a show. And so fans left those games, as Buck O'Neil would say, you couldn't go to the concession stand because you might miss something you ain't never seen before.
Now, guys, it's interesting that you bring that up because people keep, there's this concern that baseball is nowhere near as popular as it was 20, 30 years ago. And they keep saying, well, maybe if we change this about the game, maybe if we change that about the game. John talks about the BS rules. That's make baseball fun to watch. And if maybe we did that, maybe we wouldn't have to have a runner on second in extra innings or this. Maybe if people could watch and have fun and players could show that fun in their personality, more people, especially younger people, would be into the game.
Yeah, there's
absolutely, Crawly.
Yeah, you would never have to worry about having to watch. You don't have to worry about a watch. And I've said this to the commissioner and his folks. Man, if you want to worry about millennials and how long you can hold their attention and this kind of thing, if you give me something I want to see, I'll sit there all day and watch. I'll sit there all day. You don't ever hear anybody complain how long a football game is. Never. No, so you just give me something I want to see. And I always harken back, and I know you guys for 2016 was special for you all there in Cubby Land, and Buck was smiling. He was smiling in 2015 when our Kansas City Royals won the World Series, and 14 when they get to the World Series. And what I loved about those two teams in 14 and 15, they played a Negro League style of play. Yeah, and as you guys know, man, when you can steal a base and everybody in the place knows that you're going to try to steal that base. They don't know what pitch it is, but they know you're going to try to steal that base. It doesn't get much more exciting than that. And I was on one of these sessions with my good friend, our fine general manager, Dayton Moore. And we were talking about the game that the Royals played here in Kansas City. And Lorenzo came, my good friend, and I'm so happy for him, the success he's having over in Milwaukee now, he scores from first base on a single against the Blue Jays in that playoff game.
Yeah.
And when he makes that pop-up slide at home plate and he jumps up, and you can see the place is going absolutely crazy. That's baseball, man. It doesn't get any more exciting than that. And I know I'm old school, so forgive me. I'm old school. I don't like the home run strikeout thing that has become our game. But, it's like anything else. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I just don't like it. I want to see guys moving, and I know the analytics, basically put managers in positions where they can't do this. You don't want to take the bat out of your big hitters' hands and these kinds of things. But, man, it sure is exciting to see guys out there moving, great pitching, great defense. It's still the formula for winning baseball, in my opinion.
Yeah, like seeing a backup catcher pitching and getting a win in an extra inning game.
Yeah.
That's baseball. That'll keep you in your seats, baby.
That's something you've never seen before. Speaking of Lorenzo Cain, Will Venable, who's going to come on, I think, for our third conversation, and we were talking the other day in the outfield while we were shagging BP. I was asking, he's our third base coach and he's our outfielders coach, and his dad Max played for 10 years in the big leagues, and Will played for I think 7 or 8 seasons as well. But we were talking about, I always like to ask him, like, who's the best outfielder? Who's the best? Who do you think the best outfielder is? Like, because we have all these new advanced analytics, but they're really hard to kind of figure out if they are accurate, I think, in my opinion, especially with guys in the outfield, because it's like probability of the ball being caught, and that's heavily reliant on positioning before the balls even hit anyway. But one of the things that we both agree on is Lorenzo Cain is one of the most fun people in all of baseball to watch, especially at Wrigley Field, how he navigates the fence, his like spatial awareness of where he is. But to your point, Bob, that him on the bases is such a pain in the ass, because he's done it a couple times to us where he does this thing where he gets into a pickle and he gets the like base back behind him vacated for the guy that was on base. So he like purposely gets caught in a rundown, and he ends up running himself all the way back to the base. But the guy who hit the ground ball ends up being safe. And he's beat us on it a couple times. And he's the only player in the 20 years I've been in professional baseball that has the ability and like the awareness of what's happening to make those things happen. And so when you see him scoring on him and Javi Baez are two of the ones that really stand out to me as ones that figure out, like, they know how to play this other game that's happening. That's like you're saying, it's incredibly exciting to watch Javi slide in and then move his hand so you can't tag him, or to watch him steal home. Those are when baseball was finally integrated. That's what we brought into the game. And when you look at, or the second time, I guess, with Jackie in 47, but when you look at our Hall of Fame, and you look at the best players, you look at the best hitters that ever lived, that ever walked on this earth, there's a pretty common theme that I notice when I think about Willie Mays and Henry Aaron and Barry Bonds. That's a decent outfield if you ran it out there, left, right, and center. So that's a decent outfield. And what are we without their influence from the people that came before him? Like who is Barry Bonds without his father, and without Dusty Baker, and without those influence in his life? Dusty Baker, who, by the way, as we've joked about, his actual name is John Baker.
The original.
He's the original John Baker.
Satchel was down with the Braves. The Braves brought Satchel down to help him get his pension. He was a few months away from getting his pension. So Bill Bartholomew, who owned the Braves, brings Satchel down in 1968. Well, Dusty was a young player with the Braves at that time. And Satchel always called him Daffy. He didn't call him Dusty, he called him Daffy. And so finally, Dusty says, "Satchel, my name is not Daffy, it's Dusty." He says, "Daffy, I know what your name is."
Bob, John Baker was talking about Hall of Famers, and one of the great travesties in baseball is that Buck O'Neil does not have his plaque in Cooperstown. There's an award named for him and stuff like that. But, the fact that he didn't get put in when he was alive, and because of his influence on the game as a great manager, as a player, however you want to put him in, he belongs. Where do you see that happening as far as the potential of Buck O'Neil getting his plaque and finally being recognized among the greats in Cooperstown?
Well, we thought that in 2006, when they had this epic election of Negro League players, and they put 17 in, and they left Buck and Manny Minoso out. We thought that was going to be the end all for Negro Leaguers in the Hall of Fame, because they had put this thing together so that they could put all the Negro League players who deserved to be there in one fell swoop. And then it didn't happen for Buck and Manny Minoso. And Buck missed by one vote that year. And Manny was very close as well. And it still baffles me that at that time they were the only two players that are still alive that were on that list in 2006. And it still baffles me that they didn't have the foresight to put both of those incredible men into the National Baseball Hall of Fame. So we thought it was over. As a matter of fact, I had basically given up on it. And what we understand now is that through the Golden Era Committee, there is a possibility that both of those guys' names could be on the ballot as early as December of this year, right around the time of baseball's winter meetings, and that there is an outside chance that both could actually get into the Hall of Fame. Now, will it mean the same to me? To be honest, no, because they're both gone now. Now, we could have had them both there to celebrate with them, but for their fans who have been so vigilant about the fact that they deserve to be in the Hall of Fame, it would be hard for me not to be happy for them, because I think they will feel like their voices have been heard and that there has been this level of vindication if it were to happen.
And
I can say this with no uncertainty. Buck O'Neil is a Hall of Famer. Minnie Minoso is a Hall of Minnie Minoso was the Latino Jackie Robinson, man. You know what I'm saying? And Buck O'Neil did everything you could do in this game, and he did it with grace, class, and dignity. So if anybody represents a Hall of Famer, it's Buck O'Neil and Minnie Minoso. And so do I think they should both be in? Absolutely. Am I biased? Absolutely.
Are the people that choose the Hall of Famers biased? Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. When you get Minnie Minoso, he's batting with 5 bats at one time. Like, how can you not let a man like that into the Hall of Fame?
But Bob, when you talk about grace and dignity, and I don't know if everyone knows this story, you talk about the election of when they brought all the Negro League players into the Baseball Hall of Fame, and he missed out by 1 vote. Then they turn around and asked him to speak. You know, and you think about how bitter you might be to be 1 vote short and then say, oh, can you induct these other people? But he did it.
And there he was, speaking on behalf of 17 dead folks who did not have a voice. When the world was saying, this should be your Hall of Fame speech, he's there speaking on behalf of those who didn't have a voice. And guys, I still say today that it was one of the most selfless acts in American sports history. And then a little over 2 months later, old Buck passed away himself at age 94, a month shy of his 95th birthday. And so, yeah, you know, there are things that the grace and the dignity that this man displayed in the face of defeat was just absolutely amazing. It perhaps was his finest hour when I go back to February of that year on how he handled the news of not getting in, because I had to tell him. I was the one that broke the news to him. And I'm not lying. I was literally on the verge of tears when I had to sit down and tell my friend that he didn't get enough votes to get in, because I really believed that he thought he was going to get in and that this was going to be his swan song. You know, he was sick and he never let on to us that he was sick. Never said a word, never complained, not one day. And so this was going to be the thing that would propel his museum into perpetuity. He didn't want it as much for himself as he did for his museum. And so when it didn't happen, I had to tell him. And then he would go downstairs on our Field of Legends, and he delivers this amazing concession speech that day. And what he did was he literally implored all of us not to be angry, not to be bitter, not to express any ill will toward anyone who had anything to do with this decision. He said, I had an opportunity. And in this great country of ours, that's all you could ever ask. They didn't think old Buck was good enough. We got to live with that. But if I'm a Hall of Fame in your eyes, that's all that matters to me. Just keep on loving old Buck. And I had to remind myself, and I think John mentioned this earlier, that for Buck not getting in the Hall of Fame pales in comparison to some of the things that men like him had to endure in this country. Yeah. And so when we talk to our young kids, particularly my young ball players, and having them understand the love that they have for this game, think about this. They could ride into a town, fill up the ballpark, and yet not be able to get a meal from the same fans who had just cheered them, or not have a place to stay. So they slept on the bus and would eat their peanut butter and crackers until they could get to a place that would offer them basic services, but they never allowed that to kill their love of the game. So if I've got to sleep on the bus, and if I've got to eat my peanut butter and crackers, then so be it. I'm going to keep playing ball. And really, that's the winning spirit that this museum embodies.
Wow.
Well, Bob, we've taken up your entire morning, and I know that, and I thank you so much too, because I know you've got a very busy day. Later on today, you've got this going on, which is you're going to be on The Burn. Is that what it's called?
Burn with Mitch.
The Burn with Mitch, and Greg Kreindler. Am I saying his last name correct? He's going to be on with you, and I know you've got a credible exhibit. Is it still going on of some of Greg's paintings.
We just took it down.
Just
But
took it down.
That's one of Greg's magnificent pieces of a young Rube Foster. He was a gangster, man. Rube was a bad dude. Yeah, he was a bad dude. He could pitch that ball.
I think sometime in the off season, I would love to just interview you about just Rube Foster.
Right.
Just get into.
We could spend the show talking about Rube Foster or Josh Gibson or Satchel Paige, and would have no problem because the stories are so plentiful. But no, man, I've absolutely enjoyed this, and John, man, it's great to be with you on John Baker Day. I remember when they had Satchel Paige Day at Wrigley Field in July. It was in July of 1942. It was Satchel Paige Day at Wrigley Field, and the Negro Leagues didn't play as much at Wrigley as they did at Comiskey. But this is real special. They're playing the Memphis Red Sox, and it's Satchel Paige Day, and the Chicago Defender, the great African-American weekly paper there, they present Satchel with a gold pocket watch. And the pocket watch is inscribed on the back. It says, "To the world's greatest pitcher from the world's greatest newspaper." And we recently acquired that watch. That watch is proudly on display downstairs here at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum as a reminder of Satchel Paige Day at Wrigley Field.
And if you're ever in Kansas City, you've got to check out the Negro League Baseball Museum. You got to eat some barbecue. Oh, yeah. And you got to go catch a Royals game because that's a great ballpark too. I had a great time there. And Bob, I just really appreciate everything that you do to keep the history of our game alive and to bring especially fans that don't know about, well, half of the baseball that was being played before 1940 or 1962 or whenever the Negro Leagues finally unfortunately gave up the ghost, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it.
Absolutely.
Just thank you so much for bringing all
Bob,
this knowledge. It's really appreciated. And so
before Bob takes off, I'd like to say, Danny, and I think that, we talked about this, Bob. We've talked about how, at least for me personally, this event, this day started because of something kind of crazy happening. And it was a fan run event. But one of the things that Danny knows is that, like, I've always been looking for a time to take my name out of it, to step back and be a backup. And perhaps in the future, we could make this more of a Buck O'Neil tribute. I
love it. Awesome. Buck O'Neil Day.
Yeah.
And just for everybody,
I like the transition.
Yeah.
And just for everybody out there, obviously with the virus and everything, it's difficult maybe to make it to the Negro League Baseball Museum. There's a lot of stuff you can do to support them on their website. They sell a lot of great things. I have this bobblehead here of Buck O'Neil. I like collecting Cubs memorabilia, and when you guys came out with those bobbleheads, I was all over that. So a lot of people can still support the museum even if you can't physically go there.
Yeah, I got a couple pictures too I want to put up. This is some Chicago American Giants gear that you can go buy it on the website right now. This is my dream jacket.
What?
Yeah, this is beautiful. And look at the back. That $140. So my birthday is past, but Christmas is coming, and so it. And also, I know you were doing your 100 for 100. I think I didn't see that on your site this time, but you can become a member of the Negro League Baseball Museum at any time. So just go to their website and give them a donation, become a member. It comes with passes to come visit, and Bob's always around. So
always.
Yeah, that's where I met you. I got a picture of here we are hanging out in Kansas City, making me and my friends all look like a bunch of slouches.
Danny, we're gonna need Bob to take you to a suit store in Kansas City the next time you go, so that you don't ruin the picture again.
Well, but see, here's why though. Here's Bob collecting a $25,000 check, so he can afford to look better than me.
I'm always smiling when there's a check in the picture.
I got a check right behind me. I got one of those giant checks that somebody gave me once too. Oh, well, it's beautiful. Bob, thank you so much. And please go to the Negro League Baseball Museum And also, I want to shout out Lavonte, and please go to Lost Boyz Inc. too and check out the work he's doing. This is why we're doing what we're doing this John Baker Day. We're trying to raise money for the Lost Boys, so please go to lostboysinc.org and donate to Lavonte, donate to Bob Kendrick and all the great work they're doing. And I guess John Baker Day is now Buck O'Neil Day starting tomorrow. So enjoy the final John Baker Day.
This will be the
No. We got to keep this. I'm just getting here, guys. We got to keep John Baker Day. We got to make both work.
Don't worry, Lavonte. We could treat it like Prince. We can call it Buck O'Neil, formerly known as John Baker Day. Okay? We'll have some little script, but it'll be a nice. I really appreciate. I couldn't be honored more to pass off whatever platform we've built to the people that I feel like actually deserve it. You know, this is Danny and I talked about this concept a lot for people that come from my situation. You know, I was a backup catcher in the major leagues at the end of my career, but it's time for people like me to become the backup to everybody else. And so that's where I want to move forward. And I don't know, Danny, I don't know what we decided on with obvious shirts. But do we have a picture of that?
I think I do have it in here. Let me wait, where is it? Oh yeah, there it is.
Yeah, that's what we're coming out with here.
Today.
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 That is coming out, and that's in the vein of raising money for Lost Boyz Incorporated, and for people like me. More of these conversations, so that we can get some history, so that we can have some feel, and we can really figure out. We can have a game plan for how we can become the backup to promote these voices, to talk about this history, and to when we leave this world, be a part of activism and positive change.
Yeah. Well,
what I'm hearing right now, for us Chicagoans, hopefully we can walk away with this and come back together, Danny, John, Crawly, and let's try to inspire this city, man. Let's get Buck on that. You know, the Hall of Fame is important. Maybe we push that. That's national conversation, but just in Chicago, a statue. You know, we're taking statues down. We need to put something on those empty pedestals. Let's put something up.
Yeah,
I'm all for replacing.
You
Columbus
said that, Danny. I've been pushing it. Let's go.
Forget Columbus. Let's do Buck O'Neil and Rube Foster. That's what
There
I'm
we
saying.
go.
Yeah, I'm with it. Let's do it. Well, thank you, Bob. Thank you, John. Thank you, Lavonte. Thank you, Crawly.
Thank you, guys.
And happy John Baker Day to all. Today is the actual day when we're filming this, and thanks for watching. And we'll see you on the next episode where we're gonna have Doug Glanville on, talking about the present state of black baseball in Chicago. And thanks for all being on, and we'll see you guys on the next episode.
God bless, guys. Thank you.
All right, everybody.